Good morning and thank you for joining us for State of Texas In Depth. I'm Josh Hinkle. The final days of the Texas legislative session were overshadowed in many ways by the severe weather that affected just about every corner of Texas. We'll take a closer look at what's happening at the state capitol in a moment, but first, a week ago, horrific and frightening storms sparked tornadoes and deadly flash floods. Many communities, especially the ones along the Blanco and San Marcos rivers, remain in disarray a full week later. Governor Abbott was one of the first high-level state leaders to visit Wimberley. He thanked the hundreds of first responders and took a tour over the Blanco River.
You cannot candy coat it. It's absolutely massive. And I think it sends a powerful message to anyone who is in harm's way over the entire state of Texas over the coming days as we see ongoing rain.
Other state leaders also visited the area. This week, KXAN's Phil Prazen joined Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick for an aerial tour of Hays County.
Lifting off in a DPS helicopter, Lieutenant Governor Patrick took in the full extent of the damage. He pointed out the home those three families stayed in, the last place they were seen before water rushed them away. Then the bridge water barreled over as the river doubled in width and rose 20 feet. Back on the ground, he talked about what could be done.
We're going to do everything we can to help you recover, but also prepare for future events like this.
He says local responders want more alarms and gauges upriver. More dams could help control the water and capture it to help our Texas droughts. But above all, the loss of life and those still unfound weighed on him.
I asked the question, how long could it be before we find and will we find everyone who's missing?
A question unanswered as state leaders grapple with how the state should respond to the flood of 2015. Phil Prazen, KXAN News.
In Houston, the flat landscape created a much longer-lasting flood. Days later, water remained on some major side roads. At least 4,000 buildings were damaged. One theory behind these recent storms, climate change. State climatologist John Nielsen Gammon says these heavy rainstorms are consistent with what we'd expect from climate change. Nielsen Gammon, an appointee of Governor George W. Bush, told the Texas Tribune the state needs to start taking climate change seriously. He says every state agency in California includes climate change in their long-term planning. Many of those decisions affect everything from where roads are built to how the state plans for water. But getting ready for a drought is very different from getting ready for floods, right? This week I sat down with the Texas Water Development Board Chairman Carlos Rubenstein and found out we need to be ready for both. So it's kind of a false sense of security the way we have been talking about all this rain and being out of drought, but is that necessarily true?
It is true that we're out of a drought, but it is also a false sense of security. All too often in Texas, we've seen periods of drought interrupted by sometimes floodwaters, unfortunately, like we're seeing now. And we think our problems are over, and we forget about planning, continuing to plan for the future. The fact is, whether we're in drought or not, we're going to continue to grow, and our demands for water will continue to increase.
What legislation specifically this session has your agency really been pushing for?
Well, actually, what we've seen occur is the magnitude of House Bill 4 in the last session took care of so many issues for us and set up a program that we're still implementing today that I think the legislature wanted to see how that played out, and I think it's playing out very well. We're ahead of schedule in that regard as we're moving forward with the planning for the first round of funding for the projects that we'll be looking at here in the next couple of months.
And just to remind the viewers, HB4 was the one that implemented the Swift Water Fund, which is $2 billion that rolls over continuously so you can fund infrastructure projects throughout the state.
House Bill 4 is significant. You're correct. It allowed Texans to decide whether $2 billion from the rainy day fund should be set aside strictly to be able to fund projects that are in the state water plan. It also gave us the ability to do incentives to incentivize that development moving forward. And remember, it charged us with taking the $2 billion and over a 50-year period making funding available for up to $27 billion worth of projects that we all know we're going to need across Texas.
You mentioned the first round of projects. I think think there were 39 in the list of priorities, correct?
Yes, the first round of, because we were ahead of schedule, because we were able to open up the window for applications 4 months ahead of schedule, we were able to close that first window around February 5th, and we got actually 48 applications that came in. Some of them were for projects that are not in the state water plan. The statute was very clear. Projects had to be in the state water plan. 39 of those were invited to submit full applications. Those are due on June 5th. We will continue to review them going forward and make final determinations this summer about which ones of those we're going to fund. But think about the impact that this will have. You got right now 37 projects that we're looking at. Totaling first year assistance alone is over $1 billion. $4 billion in assistance just for those 39 projects over the next 10 years. Having the ability to do that, because again of what the legislature did last year, puts Texas in a very good position for water planning going forward.
Many of those are drought related, and I know that Central Texas has had a lot of drought issues, and when you go out and look at Lake Travis right now, it's just very apparent. But why wasn't Central Texas on that list? Did they just not apply, or did they not meet the requirements?
The window of opportunity was open to all of the regional planning groups that had project sponsors that wanted to advance a water management strategy. If you just simply focus, for example, on the applications that came in SWIFT, then you would easily forget about the other funding programs that we have. The fact is that we, through our state revolving fund, our development fund that we also have had for several years, we have provided money to fund projects in Central Texas and across the state. So it's wherever it best fits.
So you have several different programs that are available for municipalities out there.
Absolutely, and the whole goal is to be able to advance their capacity increases that they need in their plants, water management strategies that they need to look going forward, and to be able to, through the assistance of the Water Development Board, reduce that total cost to the end user.
Why do you, so the way I understand it, the board is one of 3 entities in the state that helps with flood mitigation. Why doesn't the state have a better flood control policy?
Well, our role within that grouping for flood control is to be able to help communities. Right now we have about 1,200 communities actually across the state that participate in the National Flood Insurance Program. We have continuous outreach to them. We provide, utilizing federal grants and state grants, right now over $100 million worth of planning grants. So the whole purpose is to allow these communities to make their decisions about how they want to implement the federal program so that they can be eligible for the insurance that comes as well. It benefits those communities to be able to implement the necessary requirements to be able to, as you have land that is being developed, ensure that it's not in a floodplain. To the extent that it is in a floodplain, that you mitigate any potential loss. To the extent that you've had severe repetitive losses, that you are able to mitigate those as well. So we provide grants both from federal money that we get and also from state funding. And as I stated earlier, we've done over $100 million for that type of activity. And again, about 1,200 communities are participating.
A lot of the responsibility does rely on the city and the county to actually deal with a lot of those projects on their own. Do you feel like if the state was able to do more before a flood happens, then maybe some of that money would not need to be spent?
Well, think about the logical progression of how the development takes place. For example, let's say we start with a water management supply strategy, and it happens to be a reservoir. Well, the reservoir also has the ability to provide flood mitigation. To the extent that you're looking at improving conveyance canals, and we have some of those projects that we're looking at funding, that also helps with flood mitigation. So at the state level, we're doing that with the funding that we have in place, either with the development fund or the SWIFT. But the decisions for land use and the decisions for development are at the local level. So when you're talking about, and I'm speaking from having been a city manager in Brownsville in the past, you know that decisions for approving subdivisions, for example, are at the local level. And so it is best left at those communities to look at when somebody comes in and wants to take land that is going to be somebody's new subdivision and wants to plat it out, let those communities, through the appropriately appointed floodplain administrator, determine whether that development is going to occur within the floodplain.
Ahead, more of my interview with Water Development Board Chairman Carlos Rubenstein. Could the floods in Central Texas lead to more of a state investment here? It's all coming up on State of Texas in Depth. Welcome back to State of Texas in Depth. With so much rain falling in Central Texas, it shows why water infrastructure matters so much. Joining me today is the man leading up the Texas Water Development Board, Carlos Rubenstein. Thank you very much for being with us. Many would consider the drought an emergency, and obviously a lot of the funding from the state has centered around the drought. When there is an emergency declared, like the governor has done this week for so many counties related to floods, do you expect many grant applications to come in for that kind of emergency?
When you have these kind of emergencies, the responsibility for responding, where you see the assistance coming from, really belongs with the different agencies, the Department of Emergency Management. That's where the declarations that the governor made and the FEMA assistance can come into play.
But as far as preventing a future flood, do you expect to get more applications for infrastructure that would help prevent something like that?
I think we will see, as we always do, whether it's a drought or a flood, a renewed interest in being able to look at these issues. And again, the grants that we do administer, either through federal funds or state funds, can come into play to help out. Either way you look at it, you know, we've been talking on one hand on drought and the other hand on flood. You need to prepare for both of them, because we're going to have both again in Texas. We're still in a drought in Texas. People think that the rain that we've had has settled it. It has settled it relative to soil moisture. But as you noted, some of our reservoirs have not recovered. So to the extent that they haven't recovered, we need to recognize that in those areas we still have a water supply problem. In the same areas, you're having flood impacts. We need to be able to prepare and plan for both. Again, going back to what occurred in Texas in 2011, how persistent that drought was, I think that changed the mindset of Texans and how we need to prepare for future droughts, because we will have them again.
I know one of the pieces of legislation this session was talking about a statewide water grid. Is that even possible in a place like Texas?
Well, you know, I don't know whether it's possible or not. I will tell you this. When I was water master for the Rio Grande, one of the abilities for that system to respond to drought conditions was a very active water market. The ability to move the water was the Rio Grande itself, but having an active and efficient and effective water market helped us alleviate some of the shortages that we had. You need to look at the conditions that exist in Texas and where it's feasible. At the end of the day, you need to incorporate this into the cost of being able to produce and deliver that water, because as users, we will have to pay for those improvements.
With your experience in water and your current role, what advice could you give to our water people here with the Lower Colorado River Authority, Austin Water, what Central Texas is doing?
Well, at the end of the day, when we talk to groups, and we always come back to conservation, because every drop does count. So whether we're dealing right now with a flood event or in times of plenty or a future drought, we cannot forget how important that resource is. We need to find better ways of protecting it. But also look what the area is trying to do. They've done a great job in raising the awareness of how our roles as individuals in being able to conserve water. I think we need to continue to do that, very much like San Antonio and El Paso and the Dallas area is doing. We need to continue to talk about that. We also need to look at how we can diversify our water supplies. Are we relying on a single source? And if we are, what can we do to develop additional sources? We need to look at, for example, what is already being looked at right now. How can you capture excess flows so that at the lower parts of the basin, so it relieves the pressure upstream and you're able to conserve additional water? I think all of those are aspects that not only this area, but all parts of Texas need to look at.
Before the segment, we were saying, remembering how I interviewed you right after you were appointed by then Governor Perry. We have a new governor now. What's your relationship like with him?
Oh, it's all good. I mean, we talked to the governor's staff and about the things that we're doing, keeping them abreast of how we're implementing the SWIFT and other aspects of water issues that we're dealing with.
You have fewer than 2 years left on your term. Any thoughts about what's going to happen when that term comes up? Are you going to keep going with it? What do you think?
Oh, I don't know. I've been in public service for quite some time, and I've enjoyed it. But you always look at what you know. There's an old saying that I live by: man plans and God laughs.
Well, tomorrow, the 84th Texas Legislature will come to an end, and unlike the last few sessions, it doesn't look like lawmakers may be back for a special session for a wrap-up of everything at the Capitol. Our political roundtable joins me from the Texas Tribune, our media partner, Alana Rocha, and also the Houston Chronicle, Laura McGaughy. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
So it's been raining a lot the last week or so the lawmakers have kind of been forced to stay inside and get their business done. What has really been the big thing that shaped this last week?
I'd say guns. Between open carry, we had open carry last Friday in the Senate, hashing out Don Huffines' amendment that would limit local law enforcement from asking people open carrying if they can see their CHL license, and then what, Tuesday night campus carry. So I'd say guns, at least in the last week, have been the main topic.
And I've been seeing all over social media, they've even been getting death threats, some of the lawmakers as well, because of these issues.
This has been happening throughout the session. I think it's been an especially personal session for lawmakers, where they've seen a lot more interaction with constituents, especially a group of constituents that are particularly passionate about guns, who go over the line definitely in, saying things like they should be tried and hung for treason, things like that. So it's been definitely interesting to watch Democrats and Republicans come together to kind of say we should all stick together and for our personal safety and pass good laws, whatever laws we think are good laws.
And you've been covering this issue a lot, and it's kind of had its ups and downs, but it's been one that's been stretched through the entire session instead of getting done a little earlier.
But yeah, this is true. I actually was talking to a friend today and saying that from day one, literally, guns have been the issue this session. There was an open carry protest on the first day of the session, and it's been a topic of conversation for the past 6 months.
Another thing that we've dealt with the past governor was texting and driving, because it actually made it to his desk and then he vetoed it, but it's not going to really be something that we get to hear about this time, making it to the governor's desk. I'm a little surprised that it didn't go through this time.
Yeah, in fact, this week I believe it was Thursday, I got an email from Representative Tom Craddock's office. This is the third session he's carried this bill, apologizing to supporters of the legislation and saying, I'm embarrassed. I think it was his chief of staff saying, I'm embarrassed on behalf of our legislature that we let another, session pass by without getting this done. So it just didn't seem, they were one vote shy in the Senate of bringing it to the floor for consideration, and it just wasn't the appetite. The House passed it as it has the past couple sessions, and just didn't make it through this time.
What do you think the big hurdle is? Why can't people get on board with this piece of legislation?
Talking to some Republican lawmakers in particular, it's about, putting the government in the car with drivers and regulating adult behavior and saying, personal liberties, and they just think that this is government overreach. And as, Governor Perry, former Governor Perry said, a better approach is to do an educational campaign and warn drivers of the dangers of looking away from the road.
But it's okay to let cities do it, though, right?
Well, several...
Local control.
There you go. Invoking that when they want, kind of thing.
Exactly. What's been the mood this last week? I know Democrats have been very fiery, particularly this last week.
Yeah, I think that tensions are running high. Everyone is very tired. Both chambers have been going to midnight consistently or late in the evening. And reporters, legislators, staff, everyone's kind of burning the midnight oil. And I think getting a little bit, the wick is running low. So they're looking forward to finishing off, I think, and what looks like not having a special session. I think people are happy that when they're done, they're going to be done and be able to go home and continue on with their lives. So.
That is the word you hear, and Tuesday night against these midnight deadlines was another example of Democrats ruling the rule strategy. They don't have the numbers for the votes, but they do know the rule book, and they invoke it when they know it'll work, particularly State Representative Trey Martinez-Fisher, Democrat out of San Antonio, has a really good track record calling point of orders. He did it with campus carry, knocked off, 100 amendments pending that night, and was able to strike a deal. So
very colorful on Twitter as well.
Yes.
What's been one of the, I guess, who's been perhaps the most surprising character of the session? A lot of people talk about Jonathan Stickland.
Yes. I think in the House, definitely, Representative Stickland has gone above and beyond in terms of getting his name out there. He's been a key figure in blocking a number of local bills that are important to legislators that have been brought to them by, their fire department or a constituent, and that hasn't won him very many friends, but he has become kind of a rallying point for a lot of the far-right Tea Party crowd who like his approach to politics, but he's definitely a rabble-rouser.
It's made some longtime lawmakers really mad. I mean, he got kicked out of Representative Pickett's committee he?
He did.
Yeah, that was a dramatic video.
Every time now that Pickett is at one mic and Stickland is at the other, it's, you know, everyone's kind of watching, waiting with popcorn. So, but it's been entertaining at least to see that operation and see him go up against some of these longtime politicians.
Last thing I wanted to talk about was former Governor Perry is possibly going to make a big announcement in the coming week. What do you think is going to happen? I know you're going to be there. Are you going to go up and cover it?
I don't believe I am. I'm going to take some time.
We'll
off.
leave it on.
Yeah, I know, post-session. At least he waited till after Sine Die. But yeah, Addison, Texas, he'll be announcing, have an announcement related to 2016. Of course, it'll be huge news if it's that he decides not to run again, but all signs point to the fact that he's been doing his homework in the last 2-3 years. He admitted a while back that he was arrogant going into his last run, so I think he's learned a lot and is ready to put it to the test. But it's a big field out there with the GOP candidates, so he'll have a crowded field to contest with.
We'll be watching for your report.
Thank you.
Thank you both for being with us.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining State of Texas In Depth. Remember, you can join us every Sunday morning in the 8:30 half hour for a broader look at Texas politics. Stay tuned for Meet the Press coming up at 9. I'm Josh Hinkle. Have a great day.